Welcome to the Spiritual Sweet Spot, a place where you can rejuvenate your soul. Hosted by author M.B. Moses. This is a safe space for all.
All right. We are moving along. We are going to be discussing part 2 to the series, Unleashing Limited Beliefs for Manifesting Mastery. Simply meaning for us to understand limited beliefs or limiting beliefs so that we could also break through that barrier to help and or aid in the fruition of our manifestations. So if you remember some of the parts in part 1, we were understanding what limiting or limited beliefs are. Today, we are going to talk about part 2, which is recognizing your own limited beliefs or recognizing your own limiting beliefs. This is part 2 of the series, Unleashing Limited Beliefs for Manifesting Mastery. I am so happy and excited to be here, sending light and love to you all. Global audiences, shout out to you. Local audiences, shout out to you. Thank you all so much for continually downloading the podcast episodes and listening to this podcast. I thank you so much. How do we recognize the limited or limiting beliefs over our lives? Limiting beliefs are often deeply ingrained thoughts or assumptions that hold us back from realizing our full and or / our maximum potential. Here are a few ways to recognize the limiting or limited beliefs. Let's talk about number 1, self-reflection. So with self-reflection, here's a moment where we can take some time to reflect on our thoughts and or our beliefs. We can take some time to also notice if there is, if any, recurring negative thoughts and or patterns that come up consistently when we face challenges or when we pursue new opportunities. I could put my hand up right now and tell you that this was by far, just like I may have highlighted in part 1, one of the things that also held me back. And I have mentioned, for those of you that are new to the podcast, welcome. I mentioned in part 1, I was probably one of the most negative peoples or persons I had ever personally met. So when I do go into length and detail, just understand that you're not talking or you're not hearing from someone that's coming down the Jesus Christ mountain, but rather someone that also has been doing the work. And so when we look at the reoccurring negative thoughts and or patterns that tend to come up consistently when we face challenges and or pursue opportunities, I can recall moments in time where when things didn't work out for me, when things did not align for me, the things that I wanted, I would get a little bit disappointed, upset, and always think that it was my fault. And mainly because I would go in with the attitude of, we'll see, I don't know, kind of like defeated attitude, almost like, well, I don't know if I'm gonna get this job opportunity, we'll see. And then when it doesn't work out, I would then blame myself and say, well, you knew you were not gonna get that job. So then almost reaffirming the negative thoughts that I would have already had in my mind once the opportunity presents itself that there was a no, or not right now, not at this time. Then I would insert it with it being negative on my part, something I did or something that I knew that I wasn't going to get. And this is also a very reflective moment for me talking about this, because now hindsight is 2020, realizing that I was already moving and walking in this energy. So how could I have expected to get anything? Perhaps if I had challenged myself, if I knew better, now I do, that, I'm going to go get that job and claim the job and say that is my job position, I got it, then perhaps the frequency and perhaps where I would have been different. But I am getting older and I'm growing as I get older and realizing now that when things don't work out, it's not necessarily an international no or rejection. It's just sometimes not at that time. So what are some of the things you could look back on your life, in your life, and think, wow, I have approached it with negative self-talk patterns. I've approached it with recurring negative thoughts when you've been faced with challenges. Or perhaps when you're pursuing something new, right? Especially when we're pursuing something new. When you're trying to get that business off on the ground. When you're trying to start school. When you're trying to start something. When you're trying to start that new job. It sometimes always feels like Murphy's Law. It kind of feels like if anything that can and will go wrong, goes wrong. And so in those moments of challenges like that, how are you facing your internal dialogue to yourself? What are some of the patterns that you're thinking, well, I could definitely tone down on that. I could stop talking to myself like that. I think the best part about self-reflection is looking at it and understanding how you could present yourself, perhaps sometimes in a better light, perhaps sometimes how you could present yourself in a more positive light, and perhaps it's a moment where we could see, I like to see what I could have done better, how I could navigate the situation, and how I could do better for the future. And self-reflection is not necessarily a point of castigating, but it's a point, it's a check, it's a point, it's a checkpoint. It's a checkpoint where you're kind of checking out everything and really being rationally honest with yourself, for yourself, right? So take a moment to think of some of the self-reflective moments or recurring negative thoughts or patterns that you tend to see in your life that may pop up. Could this be also a part and prime reason where you're scripting your manifestations, you're claiming your manifestations, you are reciting your manifestations, but you're not getting that breakthrough? Could this be the moment where if we could curate this talk, this internal dialogue, could this be the breakthrough that may assist and help with the manifestation fruition? The older I grow, the more I know. And I'm understanding that, just like I prefaced a couple sentences ago, that really, truly, that if something doesn't happen for me right now, even though I want it badly, then it's just not for me within that time or within that season. And perhaps there is so many unforeseeable spiritual things that are protecting me from passing through that barrier. I think I've given an example. I've said this a couple of times, so forgive me if this is repetitive, because sometimes I'm like, did I say it on the podcast or was I talking to someone else? But it was a moment in time where I really wanted to do a career change. I was so sick and tired of where I was, but because they had worn me thin and tired and I was just done. Have you ever just been done, just tired? I was zombified. I was just going to work and not feeling fulfilled. And so I realized that now that I'm having more introspection on this, that I was approaching these things with a tired energy, with a defeated energy. So I applied for a job position. I went through the 3-tier interview process, and I felt like this was really awesome. This is something I want to do. It was seeming and looking hopeful. And by the time I did the 3rd interview and I was driving back, because I had driven 2 times to the facility, so now on the 3rd time coming back, I was like, it felt like that the last was a peer interview. It felt like it went well, and I was just excited. I was driving and envisioning myself driving from said location and being a part of that hospital organization. And so the news came down that I did not get the job. They were going to go another route. I was devastated. mortified to say the least. I really wanted this job. And I realize now in hindsight that I really wanted this job because I wanted something to help and save me from where I was. And so when I approached this whole entire situation, it was an energy resource pool from desperation, defeat, and just all kinds of low energy. And I'm not saying that's the reason why I did not get the job, because I'm about to disclose that. So while I was feeling really devastated, mortified, sad, and feeling now defeated and hopeless, like, dang it, they don't even want to hire me. What am I going to do? I couldn't envision myself being there for the rest of my life. It felt like torture. And so, torture. And so I went along, continued to work, and I want to say perhaps in 6 months, it was a few months after that interview, that hospital got consolidated and got acquired by a big organizational system here in the city and state I live. And they brought their own people. So everyone that belonged in that hospital was indefinitely released because they came with all their staff for that acquisition. So I would have been in that gene pool of the people within that hospital barely under 6 months new to lose a job. Then I promise you, I already know myself and my behavior sometimes. I would have lost that job and I would have been looking around thinking about this place that I dreaded and didn't want to be. And then perhaps even at that moment in time, I could have, with the self-negative dialogue that I consistently had, I would have probably been blaming myself, thinking, see, you should have just stayed where you were. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. Why did you have to move? So I could have probably spiraled from that. And so I just highlight that moment to preface that for people to understand. Perhaps it may resonate with somebody that today's rejection, today's no, today's we can't do this right now does not necessarily mean it's personally targeted towards you. Perhaps your ancestors, your spirit guides, they're protecting you from the unknown. Perhaps universe itself is protecting you from the unknown. So look at it like that, right? So let's move along. As we recognize our limited beliefs. Part two, this is part 2. So number 2, negative self-talk. Pay attention to the language you use when talking to yourself. Do you frequently use words like I can't, or just words like can't, never, always? These may indicate underlying limiting beliefs. And that just really highlights where I was in my life as well. I was infamous for using, I knew it wouldn't work out for me. It never does. This is always happening to me. So when you look back into your mind, what are some of the negative self-talk? What does the dialogue look like to you? What are you saying about yourself? We touched briefly on that as we talked about self-reflection, recognizing negative thoughts and patterns, right? So now we dive deeper and put on your spiritual goggles, get your spiritual shovel, because where we're going, we have to see beyond the veil. We have to see beyond the spiritual veil. We have to see what's at work here, because with raw eyes, we cannot decipher, right? So we have to go beyond the veil. What does negative talk look like to you? What does that, or what can you think about in moments when you have talked about yourself negatively? Every day is a learning moment with me. Each and every day I'm getting better with time, is what I like to always say. And I remember at one point in time, I used to have an ex-coworker who, when she made the most minor mistakes, very fixable, she would use the bottom of her palm, open palm, and pound her forehead and say, I'm so stupid, I'm so stupid, I'm so stupid, you know? And these are some of the reflective moments. And me highlighting her is not saying that I'm exempt. My negative self-dialogue was internal. It was dialogue. Hers was more verbal and it had action behind it. So we were two peas in a pod. So what does that look like to you? What are you saying about yourself, whether you are articulating it loudly or internally? What does that look like, and how does that make you feel? We have to be mindful of how we address ourselves, how we talk to ourselves. It's a learning process for me as well. I feel like the more we hang on to negative self-talk, it morphs into other categories. So if I'm talking negatively about myself, then I just feel like it just brings out all the other negative, low vibrational energy with it that just circulates around that. Perhaps it's I have put on so much weight, I don't feel good about myself, I'll never lose the weight I want. I don't know, nobody likes me because I'm fat. Nobody's ever going to see me because I'm fat. So everything now exists around that realm. Sometimes these things, I've stated before, it's not a conscious effort. You're not looking at yourself in the mirror echoing these words, but rather it's now a subconscious embedded thought. It's a seed that has taken root. It's sprouting in your heart soul. So now when you walk and you move, you seem less confident. You feel exhausted because of how you feel about yourself. You feel that no one sees you because you don't see yourself. So I always feel like all that starts to morph into other components, into the physical realm, a manifestation of things within the physical realm. So we have to be mindful of how we approach ourselves, how we speak about ourselves. And I want to also add this in here. I also feel it's always important as well how we speak of others, right? We cannot be sitting up here being mindful of how we speak about ourselves and how we have this dialogue among us about ourselves, for ourselves, very highly positive and high vibrational, and we're turning around and gutting other people negatively, sending that energy into the atmosphere, right? So let's continue. We are unleashing limited beliefs for manifesting mastery. This is part 2. Part 2 is recognizing our own limiting beliefs. We covered part 1, which is understanding what limiting beliefs are. Let's dive into it. When we get done with this part, you're going to see that all of these points are directly related. So let's talk about emotional reactions. My. Emotional. Did somebody say emotional? Let's talk about emotional reactions, right? This is the part where we notice how we react emotionally to certain situations or ideas. If we find ourselves feeling anxious, find ourselves feeling fearful, or discouraged when considering a specific goal or opportunity, it definitely may be a sign of limiting beliefs. I could go first, okay, on this emotional reaction roller coaster majig. Okay, so listen, you're hearing from a person where it took me 20 years of my career to add on to my career portfolio. 20 years. Most people that understand the field that I'm in clinically, the more credentials, the more you level up your game, and the more you can advance yourself. I crippled myself. I paralyzed myself because I knew that this was part requirement to obtain the best of the best positions, to scale up. But because I had this embedded seed in my soul's heart that I was never smart enough, this was an exam dubbed the hardest exam and all this other thing. So I was mortified to take this exam. Because I felt that it would further perpetuate this narrative and confirm that I am not smart. So I procrastinated around it. I was an ongoing student of the craft, kept trying to study, trying, not doing, right? And because I was afraid to face it, I was afraid to fail because this is something that I love to do. This is something I feel like I was also born to do, right alongside with my writing. And so it took some time. And therefore it put me in a category. Well, here we go. We're talking about now self-sabotaging. We're talking about the consequences of limiting beliefs themselves, self-sabotaging. So therefore, I was stuck in a comfortable, very toxic, very exhaustive work environment because they didn't ask for all of that. So I was comfortable there because I knew if I left that place, wherever I had to go, they would give me 6 months to a year to get that credential. And I didn't want to because I didn't want to face my fear around it. That was the biggest emotional reaction to my situation. And here's the thing. Once again, these are not conscious efforts where we look ourselves in the mirror and I say to myself, all right, girl, we're self-sabotaging. We ain't going to get that registry because, it's hard. The test is hard. We're not going to do it. It shows up in our behavior. It shows up in how we present ourselves to the world. It shows up in the things that we do surrounding the thing that we're trying to avoid, the thing that makes us fearful, anxious. It shows up as subtle reminders within our psyche, in our subconscious state. All of this stuff starts to bubble up to remind me that, remember, you've been dubbed not smart enough. Not only was it a societal system caption, but also the people, the adults in my life that were supposed to develop me in my formative years with encouragement and so forth. Not only that, but they also echoed what societal system said. So it had to be true. And my mind held on to that. And what is so crazy about all of this is it didn't matter how many certificates, how many programs I've done, how my academia record looked, which was still really good. I still didn't see myself. I didn't see myself as worthy of passing this. Even with that, I would sometimes say, girl, you got it. You just got to study. Look at all you've done and all this other stuff. And I'd be like, no, because no, the physics is so hard. The physics is so hard. The physics is so hard. So therefore, that's what was happening. Internal dialogue that held me in captivity. And I'm here to tell someone that may be in my situation today that take the time out, dedicate the time out. I can't tell you how to just surpass it and man up, woman up, and go for it. That's not my language because I've been here before. But I could just tell you how it has showed itself in my life. And the 20 years in this last 20 years of my career where I could have advanced myself, did a lot of things to be where I need to be net worth wise, but that one fear and anxiety of facing this big Goliath thing in my life because I was under the impression and rhetoric that I had escaped life itself with a lot of things through, like, I thought cheating, scheming, and when I say all of that is because it's like I always felt like, okay, I did go through a lot of programs. I have successfully completed a lot of school, even though the grades themselves, even though the results themselves were positive. I just felt like, I don't know, there was a conspiracy out there or something, or it wasn't easy. It was just easy. This was it. Like, I couldn't see myself to say, no, it was not easy. It was like a lot of work. Heck, I got up out of that program. I had to take that physics too. And I had to take my specialties out of the program itself. And I did amazingly well, high 90s, but I still didn't see it because I would justify that, well, maybe the exam, they just made it easy. It was just easy. They just wanted us to pass. because I was that oblivious into myself that I didn't even understand consciously that you are actually capable, girl. You're doing it. So this may resonate with someone today, right? Because this emotional reaction also morphs. I feel like my emotional reaction came from the negative self-talk. The words that I was frequently using, consistently using. I was terrified. But come to find out, I end up moving through different steps. The universe is always guiding you with the least amount of effort. The universe is always guiding you. I just let things unfold naturally. And this is not exercising the energy of resistance, right? And what I mean by that is I got to a point where I realized I had to face this at some point in time. And I was like, I don't want to leave the industry without ever obtaining this. Let's just go for it, right? So here I was. I found myself in a Facebook group, Author Time. We do a lot of backstories to get to the main point. So was in this Facebook group, checking out this Facebook group with the Facebook group with peers. And so what happened was I saw the messages in there. I like to lurk, read and lurk, and do little to no socializing on social media. And so this was a private group, and there was notes that kept on posting that said, hey, if you're not interactive or participating in this group, it's too many people, we're gonna have to start shaking the tree. And so I thought, okay, it's a group. I thought they didn't have a maximum occupancy, but what do I know about social media? So here you have it. I got kicked out that group, rightfully so, because I wasn't participating. And I was just using it for like resources and seeing what's happening in the industry, what's the latest, checking the temperature out there. Because that action had to happen. I went another direction. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I was kind of, disappointed. I was like, dang, how they going to kick sis out the group? But listen, they had said, I had to do a self-reflection, introspection, right? And be honest with myself, right? That I wasn't participating. And that's the other thing. Once you start to get really strong in your self-reflection and introspection, seeing yourself for who you really are and what you're trying to accomplish, the dialogue becomes easier a little bit. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it becomes easier, because in that said moment, my old self would have said, oh, why did they have to kick me out? This always happens. It always happens. People, no, but this time around, I just was like disappointed, right? Because I was getting all the tea about the industry, but all of a sudden, I cannot. And so therefore I say to myself, well, you were not. We read that post a couple of times, and I was not. The honest truth is I was not participating. So here we are now. What are we going to do? We're going to pivot. So I found another group, a bigger group with 30,000 people in it. I joined that group, did a little question, the vetting questions, got into that group. And because I was kicked out of that first group, it directed me to this other group that I would have never thought about looking for had I not been kicked out. For those of you with spiritual goggles and spiritual shovels, you're getting where I'm going with this. So here we have it. So now I'm in this group, and this group is plagued with resources. Just industry secrets, right? About this exam and all this other stuff, the missing link to my life. So I'm gathering up all this data. I'm like, okay, researching. Majority of people have used this certain resource website to prepare and all this other stuff. I'm getting all the details, all the deets. You feel me? And so after that, I start to pursue this endeavor. I say, we're going to do it. And so I access the resources that majority of people were raving and ranting about. And then I shut myself in for 3 weeks, and every waking moment to sleeping moment was a studying moment. 2 hour study, 1 hour rest, 2 hour study, 1 hour rest. That was my schedule for 3 weeks straight consecutively. I went and sat down for that exam and passed it. And passed it. I was in shock. Once again, this limiting beliefs, depending on how that seed has been placed in our soul, it takes time to recognize them. It takes time to start making the intentional changes around it. There's still some that linger, but I have to now address, because I'm doing self-reflection and having introspection in really seeing them sometimes right before they manifest themselves in my life. But even at this moment, I was in shock. I could see I passed, but I was still in shock. So I get the printout, I leave the exam center, and I sat in that car for a while looking at that printout, because this one moment in time had defined my first 20 years. This thing is what had crippled me. This thing is what had limited me because of my anxiety and fears around it, surrounding whether this thing was going to be the end or be it. But unbeknownst to me, and this may resonate with someone, that things shouldn't define us. This exam shouldn't have had to define my whole entire life. It shouldn't have had to define my intellect. It wasn't even part of my, you see what I'm saying, intellect. It was all about dedication, commitment, and just really fully committing and being disciplined within those 3 weeks. And now I recognize that as well. So it was a very, very defining moment for me. And then I'm looking at the percentages per category with high marks, still in shock, because I'm still like, wow, me? Is this the right printout? Look at me. I'm like, is this the right printout? It's got my name on it. And so that moment in time, surpassing that moment of fear, holding on to this, holding that printout, understanding I have obtained and killed this giant Goliath that had been mounted in my path, in my life, brought about more confidence for me, because I was like, all right, I did that. Let's go get everything else I need to go get within this career. Sometimes it takes just that leap of faith. Sometimes it takes going past it, pivoting a little bit, finding out another route. Sometimes there's a workaround, right? Because had it not been but for me being kicked out of this Facebook group, drove me another direction, another workaround, another area that actually ended up helping me exponentially. So sometimes the answer is not right in front of us, or what we need is not right in front of us, but maybe there's another route. Maybe there's another way around it. Maybe we just have to pivot, right? So as we go down this list, part 2, recognizing our limiting beliefs. So far we're covering self-reflection. We have covered now negative self-talk, and we have dealt with emotional reactions. So sit back, think about some of the emotional reactions that think about how they have showed up in your life as a pattern or as a behavior. What is that one thing that cripples you in fear? What gives you anxiety and discourages you from obtaining that specific goal? For some people, perhaps it's even just registering, starting back up with school. Maybe you feel like, oh, it's been such a long time I've been in school. Will I go through this? Will I be able to go through this and understand it? Perhaps starting a business. Perhaps like even sometimes in writing and getting that project. Those moments for me prove to be a little bit fearful sometimes. So what is it and what does it look like? What is the project that you're trying to embark on? Or that one, what is your Goliath? What is that big giant in your life that has sent ripples of anxiety crawling down your spine? What is that one thing that you feel so fearful of confronting or staring it deep into its soul and saying, you will not define me? What is that one thing that you emotionally react to? Some of us, it's maybe opportunities knowing that we live in a community, a city and state where the thing that we went to school for, that we love to do and want to do, we can't find that job within the city or state. But you know that if you move to another state, or if you move to this state and that state, they're hiring and the pay is worth the move, and the stars are aligned, but you are afraid because you have perhaps never left your state that you were born in. Perhaps you've never ventured out for good away from your family. So what is that emotionally crippling giant? And what is the workaround? What is the moment of pivoting? What is the go around? What is the cheat code to that? All right, so let's talk about patterns of behavior. Patterns of behavior. Observe any repetitive behaviors or actions that may be holding you back. For example, consistently avoiding risks or not pursuing dreams due to doubts or fears may stem from limiting beliefs. So this is all directly related, right? So your patterns of behavior are connected to your emotional reactions, which are also connected deeply to negative self-talk. What, if any, behavior have you noticed of yourself that you feel keeps holding you back? My prior example for emotional reactions can also echo how I was consistently avoiding to take that exam. And I mean, taking that exam opened up a lot of doors internationally, not just nationally now. And that's what I was sitting on. So what is it that you have observed, perhaps with repetitive behavior, or that thing that's having you consistently avoid taking these risks or even pursuing your dreams? What is the shadow of doubt that looms around you, the shadow of fear? I know for me, it was the fact that I never felt or thought I was smart enough to be able to sit down for this super complicated, allegedly hard test. Other than the fact that the physics freaking terrified the crap out of me. But okay, go off, And so what is it? I look back on my life as an adult and realizing really it was just a matter of what I needed to have been invested in and what it looked like, right? So granted, the narratives had been placed, right? Unsolicitedly placed in my life. But now I'm recognizing that with anything and everything, commitment, consistency, discipline will also get you to where you're going. I'm recognizing this, but it's not saying it's an easy hurdle. It's not just, jump over all these hurdles and boom, you're there, right? It's work. It's small habit forming. So what does that look like for you? I want to implore and encourage that person that perhaps has been holding on to that thing, and because you're afraid to take that risk to pursue your dreams, because you have doubts within yourself whether, and here's the other thing, it's not necessarily saying that limiting beliefs are placed upon our lives naturally during childhood, or some of us, heck, within the maternal womb. It's not necessarily saying that. It's not necessarily saying that it has to stem from childhood. We have to understand that we live in a time and a place where different phases of our lives, these could be ever so present. It's about how we also process them within the different times of our lives, that it becomes a seed of poison that takes breed and hook into our hearts and grows roots. And what I mean by that, perhaps everything was hunky-dory in childhood, but now your high school coach has been talking negatively upon your life for the last 4 years in high school. So now you take some of those aspects going beyond into young adulthood, holding on to what was said about you over your life in a negative manner. It has taken roots. So perhaps it's not childhood, perhaps it's the high school coach, it's the high school teacher, or the junior high teacher. Maybe the junior high teacher started the "you ain't never gonna amount to anything," or whatever the case is, and then it morphed to maybe another teacher in high school that echoed what the junior high school teacher echoed. And so now you take a hold of this, and it shows up in your life subconsciously. Once again, it shows up as behaviors and patterns subconsciously within us. We're not looking in the mirror and saying, I'm choosing this today. But it's just showing up in our patterns and our behaviors, the languaging that has been hurled our way. And perhaps it's a college professor. Perhaps when you started college, the whole theme of your life was plagued with professors that spoke negatively towards your academic success or towards you as a person. So now you're in a corporate setting, or perhaps looking for a job, but not so secure in who you are, because you feel like perhaps the world is echoing what these professors said about you. That's why moments of reflection and introspection are very key. Going back to the talk of affirmations and affirming with yourself, I continually have to really stick it to myself that nothing but goodness happens to me. Good things are always happening to me. Good things are always happening to me, for me, to me, for me, to me, and for me. Because the negative talk before that was it always happening to me? It's always happening to me. Nothing good ever happens to me. So now I have changed that languaging. And up to this far, it always manifests goodness and greatness. Have I faced challenges? Of course. But now I know how to better deal with those challenges and be like, you know what? It didn't work out. It wasn't for me. Not at that time. And keep it moving. We are moving right along. We've talked about self-reflection, negative self-talk, emotional reactions, patterns of behavior. Everything we're talking about here is directly related. The last part is going to talk about external influences, right? So some of these have been sprinkled among the other conversations we've been having. External influences. So sometimes limiting beliefs can be influenced by other people or societal norms, just as I echoed, right? And if you notice a particular belief that seems to be more common in your social or cultural circle, it may be worth examining whether it aligns with your true desires and goals. 100%. 100%. Here's the thing. We live in a life and time where there's social media. Don't let anyone put that pressure on you. It literally reminds me of social media being a picture could tell 1,000 things kind of deal. That's what it's giving. Because people will show you the best sides of themselves on social media. And to an average person, you will sit up there and try to compete and compare your life to the uncompetable and uncomparable from pictures or 30-second or 60-second videos that someone portrays. You might see the fancy cars, the fancy houses. We don't know. We don't know if it's Airbnb or rented Lambos. We don't know. Nevertheless, even if it is rented Airbnbs and Lambos and all this other stuff, but it doesn't serve us any good to just look and want to compare ourselves to things that we don't really understand their foundational principle or formation. I realize that I get too caught up. I used to get too caught up with social media, so I take the apps off when it starts to do, when I realize the surfing is getting out of hand and looking at stuff. It used to be a point when I used to be on Instagram back in the day, and I would see people that were around my age group where I was trying to focus on certain things, but it seemed as if they were excelling. They were living the time of their life, right? They're out in Italy. They're out in France. They're traveling the world. The life I aspired to, I would see that. But like, dang, I want to be doing all of this too. And then, not too long ago, someone could probably Google this. There was a social media influencer, but I believe this was a TikTok social media influencer. But perhaps if you probably Google social media influencer who photoshopped herself into backgrounds, this girl was living in large numbers on social media. The biggest hoax to know among other hoaxes, I guess, And here it was. She was photoshopping the background. She wasn't in Italy. She wasn't in Italia. She wasn't in the exotic places she was at. She was simply photoshopping. Listen, I say, listen, don't believe 85% of the stuff you see on social media. That's all I know. That is all I know. So, understanding that those societal norms may sometimes feel like indirect pressures. You don't have to conform to anything, but just be a true representation of yourself. Right? So perhaps in your life, think about moments where maybe you have scrolled social media, or maybe where you live around you, maybe you're not on social media, but it maybe seem like, oh wow, the neighbors, the neighborhood, same housing prices, but your neighbors seem to be doing better and better and better than you. What's their secret? What's going on? I feel like I need to keep up or something. What is it that you're noticing with societal norms? I do you one better. Let's go as far as we can. Because sometimes I have a little rebellious spirit in me, just a little bit. And my day ones know I've echoed this in one of the podcasts, but here's the thing. I didn't want to subscribe to your get engaged, get married, house, kids, all of that. Why do we do that? Who said that's what we need to do? I'm not saying you don't have to do it. Kudos for those that like to do it. And I'm not saying that it's a societal pressure. I'm just saying that I'm weird like that, and that I like to question things like that, because I feel like that's not what I wanted to do. So therefore, when my husband and I got together, we declined a white wedding. My mom was like, oh, you gotta do a white wedding, white wedding, white wedding. Nope. That's not what I wanted. We wanted to save our money and start off with other financial investments towards it. So, and I'm not saying our idea was the first idea. I know there's lots of people that have done and gone this route. People go to Vegas, people elope, people do the unconventional and untraditional, and that's what I'm talking about. Breaking ceilings, breaking the mundane, breaking the stereotype or the thought processes of society on what you're supposed to do. Who said you're supposed to do it that way? Who? Don't get pressured by societal norms. Let's talk about the social and cultural circles, especially cultural. Perhaps you live in a culture that is in the West, but they're not from the West, and their expectations of your life and for you are higher than, not higher than, but they're high, unrealistic than what you want for your life. And perhaps you are afraid that you may get kicked out the tribe, that they will stop talking to you, they will disown you if they truly found out who or what you really want to do, right? So perhaps sometimes it's cultural influences, and what does that look like for you? And sometimes cultural influences that can bring about that limiting self-talk. And what do I mean by that? Here's the thing, and this is not to pass judgment or talk about anyone's culture, but I could give an example with my culture. I foundationally, as the oldest girl child, was raised from the very young age where I could get my arm above the stove to cook big meals, and I was domesticated for marriage. That was the path that the adults in my life had decided to grow and mold me into, to being someone's wife. But it was always moments in my life where I also knew certain things. For one, I knew I wasn't going to get married to a cultural man. For two, I felt like what most people did, I would go overseas for school and stay there so I could avoid the cultural shenanigans. There's nothing wrong with my culture. It's amazing. It's awesome. It has raised me to being the person I am today. But I don't have to agree with everything. I was like, no ma'am. I mean, listen, okay, so here's the thing. I was raised in the suburbs, okay? So in my culture, here's the thing. They raise you, rear you, especially females, and the emphasis is on for marriage because you are going to get sold into marriage via dowry. And so here's the thing. So they don't want a return. There's no return policy. So they don't want you, when you get married, for the guy to turn around and say she can't cook, she can't clean, she's not domesticated, like what y'all tell me, like for real. So in order for that, the grooming, the whole thing starts at a very tender age. Every move I made in the house, no matter what it looked like, it was, well, what about when you get married? What about when you get married? Like, so in these terms of cultural, heck, sometimes even societal, perhaps you're living your best life. Perhaps your family members, perhaps relatives are looking at you like, when you're going to get married, when you're going to have kids, when you're going to do this, when you're going to do that. Don't feel the pressure. Live in your true, authentic self, in your true freedom of expression. So there it was. I was already rejecting that notion from a young age because I was like, Because listen, I'm born, bred suburban. I'm a suburban chick, okay? And so they're talking about when you get married, you could get married to a man that wants to send you to the village. And the villages is not like the country in the West, okay? All right. There's no propane tanks. There is no electricity. There is no Wi-Fi. There is no modern day amenities. So how in the world, I was trying to comprehend, how are you going to take this suburban chick and place her in a village? Like, it's not giving. Like, no thank you. I am not cut out for that life. I'm just saying. And listen, I'm not talking about anybody's life. I'm just really talking about myself. I already know myself. I was not cut out for that. Like, you were not just going to marry me off and stick me out in a village to kill a whole goat or to kill a chicken. Like, I've never had to do that, you know, but you missed a step in my domestication. We missed the killing live animals 101. And this ain't no knock. Love the animals, but I'm just saying what's reality. What's reality? Okay. So I just knew I wasn't going to cut out. I wasn't going to be cut out to do all of that. I'm just saying. I'm just like, sometimes you have to know your limitations. And I knew my limitations at a very young age. I was like, no, ma'am, I shall not be going down that route. No, you're not just going to do me like that. Like, I need my electricity. I need my basic amenities. Like, just the basic. Like, Wi-Fi, you know? But let's carry on. So, as we talk about cultural things, again, you hear me say you could, for real, denounce all of that. Like, relatives be putting too much pressure sometimes on us and people around us. Like, culturally, foreign parents, immigrant parents, it's the high expectations of wanting their children to be doctors, lawyers, architects, whatever the case is. But is that what you really want for yourself? Perhaps it's not what you want for yourself. Perhaps your happy medium is where you are at or what you want to do. And so you find a conflict within that. And perhaps you start having these limiting beliefs where everything you try to go for is not working out. Because right now is not the time for it, but there's always a moment for it, right? And so now you're looking at yourself with limiting beliefs like, I know it, my parents are right, my auntie was right, I should have just went to law school, I should have just became a doctor, I should have just did this, instead of pursuing my business, instead of trying to do what I'm doing, I should have just listened to them, I should have just went ahead and did this and did that. So now the limiting beliefs start to kick in because you're feeling like, had you followed the path that people want for you or what they were saying, then you wouldn't be met, in air quotes, with so much bad luck or with things not working out the way you want to work out. But once again, don't forget to pivot. Don't forget, is there a workaround? Or what is it when we step back and look at the tree from the forest? What is it that we could do differently to kind of propel some of these things? And then sometimes perhaps right now, and that is just not the time for it, but I'll circle back. Cultural norms and societal norms could be a lot of pressure. I definitely understand that. Perhaps you're trying to live in the true freedom of your expression and you are raised in this bona fide Western, ground in a certain moral value family where you can't exactly come out as who you want to be because now again you are afraid to be disowned. Heck, perhaps it's interracial dating. I mean, do people still have a problem with that in 2023? I'm not trying to be ignorant to the fact, but I'm just like, really? But maybe that too. Heck, forget interracial dating, right? What about just the same thing? Your culture expects you to be with this certain person, but that's not your heart's desires. And then you realize you're trying to date the people you like to date, but they keep, because it doesn't work out. Now your limiting beliefs are on yourself, thinking that, well, my parents were right, my family members were right. Maybe I'm just better off with someone from my culture because da 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 da. Right? So it's really being mindful of how things have been said and spoken over our life, in our life, for our life, by our life, with our life. How are these things being served to us? Right? And how are we holding on to them subconsciously? My hope and desire in life is for humanity itself to live in the true freedom of our expression, in our true authentic self. It's one of the most liberating moments in time and in life. And I had to learn and grow as I learn as well. That at the end of the day, we will be met with a lot of people with opinions and or statements about who we are as human beings on this journey here in the earth realm. But it's also a moment in time for us to do a very aggressive and stern, positive self-talk to ourselves, knowing that we do deserve better, that we are better, that we will always talk to ourselves in a loving, kind manner. And always understanding that good things always happen to us, for us, and always to us, and for you. Always understanding that. And also having a moment and point where you understand that if things do not necessarily work out the way you thought they would work out, that there is always a circle back to be continued. Perhaps right now is not the time, but eventually things will align themselves how they see themselves fit. It is important as we go through this series, Unleashing Limited Beliefs for Manifesting Mastery, to gravitate to these speaking points and plug in where you currently are, because all of this information is not a one size fits, but you can definitely feel free to plug in where your life fits within these talking points. This part 2 was recognizing our own limiting beliefs. And once we start to do that introspection, and introspection is being brutally honest with yourself, taking yourself to that moment where you don't like to be, but you have to be. In my terms, it's checking yourself. You checking yourself like girl or like boy, right? How we doing this? What are we going to do? How, just having that real introspective, non-biased conversation with yourself, for yourself, by yourself, but making sure that it's positive infused. Because remember, recognizing limiting beliefs is the first step towards overcoming them. Once you are able to identify these beliefs, you can work on reframing them and developing a more empowering mindset. I love you all so much, and I'm excited to talk about part 3. We are going to talk about part 3 on the next episode. I'll give you the title. It's going to be Explore the Origins of Limited Beliefs. I love you all so much, and thank you so much for downloading the podcast. Thank you so much for my day ones. If you're new, welcome, and thank you so much for tuning in. Please feel free to share this podcast. For books and or journals, please visit www.onewordmbmosley, M-O-S as in Sam, L-E-Y.com, mbmosley.com. That is mbmosley.com. Love you all so much.